you ready to dive into stories that will haunt your nights? Stories that whisper of shadows just beyond our sight, of lives touched by the unexplainable, the eerie, the downright terrifying. We're about to journey into the heart of darkness, into the chilling tales that linger long after the lights go out. Suddenly, a faint scratching sound coming from the attic of the old Victorian house. At first, Emily dismissed it. The house was old, settling, groaning under the weight of its years. But the sounds persisted, growing louder, more insistent. Whispers seemed to weave themselves into the scratching, hushed voices that sent chills down her spine. One night, she crept up the creaking attic stairs, her heart pounding against her ribs like a captive bird. The air was thick with dust and the scent of decay, the only light filtering in from the moon hanging heavy in the night sky. She swung her flashlight around, its beam cutting through the oppressive darkness, illuminating cobwebs and forgotten trunks piled high. There in the furthest corner, a rocking chair swayed gently, as if pushed by an unseen hand. The whispers intensified, swirling around her, seeming to emanate from the very walls themselves. Emily strained to make out the words, a sense of dread crawling up her throat, choking her. Just as she thought she could decipher the whispers, a cold gust of wind slammed the attic door shut, plunging her into absolute darkness. The whispers ceased abruptly, replaced by an unnerving silence, a silence that seemed to throb in her ears. Emily fumbled for the doorknob, her breath catching in her throat. When she finally wrenched the door open, she stumbled out, the image of the swaying rocking chair seared into her mind. From that night on, Emily avoided the attic, forever haunted by the whispers that lingered in the shadows. The desolate highway stretched out before him, a ribbon of asphalt cutting through the heart of the Nevada desert. The air hung heavy and still, the silence broken only by the low hum of his engine. It was almost midnight, and the only light came from the harsh glare of his headlights, illuminating the endless expanse of emptiness. That's when he saw her, a lone figure standing by the side of the road, her thumb extended in a desperate plea for a ride. She was young, maybe 18, with long dark hair and eyes that shimmered even in the dim light. Her clothes were dusty, her face drawn and pale. He pulled over, a mixture of caution and compassion swirling within him. She slid into the passenger seat, her voice a mere whisper as she thanked him. She told him her name was Sarah, and she was trying to get to the next town. He nodded, stealing a glance at her in the rearview mirror. Her reflection seemed to flicker, her eyes burning with an unnatural intensity. Miles ticked by, the silence in the car growing heavier with each passing mile. He tried to make small talk, but Sarah's responses were short, clipped, her gaze fixed on the road ahead. Then, as they rounded a bend, she was gone. Vanished. One moment she was there, the next she was gone, as if she had never existed. He slammed on the brakes, his heart thudding in his chest. There was no sign of her, no trace, just the endless empty highway stretching out before him. He was left alone, grappling with the chilling reality of the vanishing hitchhiker. Phone rang at precisely midnight, its shrill tone shattering the stillness of the night. Anna jolted awake, her heart racing. She fumbled for the receiver, her hand trembling as she brought it to her ear. "Hello?" she whispered, her voice thick with sleep. Silence. Only the faint crackle of the line answered her. She was about to hang up when a voice, barely audible, whispered her name. A cold shiver ran down her spine. The voice was unfamiliar, yet it sent a wave of unease washing over her. She asked who it was, her voice tight with apprehension. Again, silence. Then the whisper, closer this time, "I know where you live." Anna's breath hitched in her throat. Fear, sharp and cold, gripped her. She slammed the phone down, her heart pounding against her ribs. She rushed to the window, peering out into the darkness. The street was deserted, the houses cloaked in shadow, but she couldn't shake the feeling that someone was out there, watching her, their gaze burning into her back. The phone rang again, the insistent ringing like a hammer blow to her already frayed nerves. She stared at it, paralyzed with fear, the whisper echoing in her mind. Finally, she picked it up, her voice a mere tremor. "Who is this?" The voice, low and chilling, replied, "Your worst nightmare." And then, the line went dead, leaving Anna alone in the suffocating grip of terror. The antique mirror had hung in her grandmother's house for as long as she could remember. It was a beautiful piece, ornately framed, its silvered surface tarnished with age, reflecting the dim light of the hallway in a distorted, hazy way. As a child, she used to stand before it, mesmerized by her own reflection, imagining the secrets it held. But as she grew older, a sense of unease began to creep into her fascination. She'd catch glimpses of movement in the reflection, a fleeting shadow that seemed to dart behind her image. At first, she dismissed it as a trick of the light, a figment of her imagination. But the shadow persisted, growing bolder, more defined. One night, as she stood brushing her hair, she saw it again. This time, there was no mistaking it. A dark, hulking figure stood behind her, its face obscured by the deep shadows that clung to it. She froze, her breath catching in her throat. The figure remained motionless, its presence radiating an oppressive, malevolent energy. Slowly, she turned, her heart pounding against her ribs, bracing herself for the sight of the shadowy figure. But there was nothing there. The hallway was empty, the only light emanating from the old tarnished mirror that now reflected only her own terrified face. The old cemetery lay nestled at the edge of town, a forgotten patch of land shrouded in perpetual twilight beneath the boughs of ancient gnarled oaks. The air hung heavy with the scent of damp earth and decaying leaves, a silence so profound it seemed to hum in her ears. Sarah had always been drawn to the melancholy beauty of the place, finding a strange solace amongst the weathered headstones and overgrown pathways. She'd spend hours wandering the grounds, reading the faded inscriptions, imagining the lives lived and lost, the stories etched in stone. One evening, as the sun began its descent, casting long shadows across the cemetery, Sarah noticed a headstone she'd never seen before. It stood apart from the others, tucked away in a secluded corner, almost hidden by the encroaching ivy. The inscription was simple, just a name and a date, but something about it tugged at her heart. A sense of sadness, a longing, washed over her as she reached out to trace the engraved letters. As her fingers brushed against the cold stone, a bone-chilling gust of wind swept through the cemetery, swirling around her, carrying with it the faint scent of lavender and the echo of a child's laughter. Sarah looked up, her heart pounding in her chest. The air shimmered, and for a fleeting moment she saw the ghostly apparition of a young girl, her face pale, her eyes filled with a haunting sadness. The girl smiled, a sad, wistful smile, then vanished as quickly as she had appeared. Sarah stood frozen, the image of the ghostly child seared into her mind. She left the cemetery that evening, carrying with her a profound sense of unease, and a heart heavy with the weight of the forgotten stories that whispered amongst the silent stones. The late-night diner was nearly deserted, the only occupants a weary waitress wiping down counters and a lone truck driver hunched over a steaming cup of coffee. The air hung thick with the greasy aroma of burgers and fries, the fluorescent lights casting a harsh glare over the worn red vinyl booths. It was the kind of place that had seen countless stories unfold, a haven for the weary traveler, a sanctuary for the lost and lonely. Michael sat at a corner booth, nursing a cup of lukewarm coffee, his gaze fixed on the flickering neon sign outside. He was exhausted, his mind still reeling from the events of the day. He'd been driving for hours, the endless highway blurring into a monotonous stream of asphalt and white lines. He'd stopped at the diner hoping a hot meal and a strong cup of coffee would chase away the lingering fatigue. As he sat there lost in his thoughts, he noticed a man enter the diner. He was tall and imposing, his figure shrouded in a long dark coat, his face obscured by the shadows of a wide-brimmed hat. He moved with an unsettling grace, his presence radiating an aura of mystery and menace. He took a seat at the counter, his back to Michael, his gaze fixed on the reflection in the greasy spoon mirror. Michael tried to ignore him, focusing on his coffee, but the man's presence seemed to fill the diner, casting a pall over the once mundane atmosphere. He felt a shiver crawl up his spine, a primal instinct warning him of danger. He watched as the man slowly turned, his shadowed face coming into view. But where a face should have been, there was only a smooth, blank expanse of skin, devoid of features, devoid of humanity. Michael gasped, his breath catching in his throat, his blood turning to ice in his veins. The faceless man stared at him, his empty gaze burning into his soul. The antique doll had been a gift, a seemingly innocent gesture from a distant relative. It was a beautiful porcelain doll, with rosy cheeks, delicate features, and long, flowing auburn curls. Her eyes, a startling shade of blue, seemed to follow you around the room, holding a gaze that was both captivating and unsettling. Lily, a young girl with a vivid imagination and a love for all things whimsical, was immediately enchanted by the doll. She named her Anya and carried her everywhere she went. But soon, strange things began to happen. Objects would move inexplicably, whispering voices seemed to emanate from empty rooms, and Lily would wake in the night to the sound of soft, eerie laughter coming from the corner where Anya sat perched on a shelf. At first, Lily dismissed these occurrences as her imagination running wild, but as the incidents grew more frequent, more unsettling, a seed of fear began to take root in her young heart. One night, Lily awoke to a cold chill and the distinct feeling of being watched. She sat up in bed, her eyes wide with fear, her gaze drawn to the doll sitting on the shelf across the room. The moonlight cast an eerie glow on Anya's porcelain face, and Lily could have sworn the doll's blue eyes were glowing, burning with an unnatural light. Then the doll's head turned, its gaze fixing directly on Lily, a malevolent smile spreading across its rosy lips. Lily screamed, scrambling back in terror as the doll levitated from the shelf, its porcelain limbs cracking and twisting, its once innocent face contorting into a grotesque mask of evil. The abandoned hospital stood on a windswept hill overlooking the town, its skeletal frame silhouetted against the stormy sky. Its windows, long since boarded up, stared out like empty eyes, the remnants of paint peeling from its walls like scabs. It had been closed for decades, a monument to decay and forgotten suffering. Legends swirled around the place, whispers of medical experiments gone wrong, of patients who never left, their souls forever trapped within its crumbling walls. Mark, a photographer with a penchant for the macabre, was drawn to the hospital's desolate beauty, its haunting aura of despair. He'd heard the stories, the chilling tales that sent shivers down the spines of locals, but he dismissed them as folklore, nothing more than imaginative embellishments of the truth. Armed with his camera and a sense of morbid curiosity, he ventured inside, the rusted metal door groaning in protest as he pushed it open. The air within was thick with dust and the stench of decay, the only light filtering in through cracks in the boarded-up windows. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the drip, drip, drip of water seeping through the dilapidated ceiling. As he explored the deserted hallways, he felt a growing sense of unease, a prickling sensation on the back of his neck, as if he were being watched. The shadows seemed to deepen, to twist and writhe, and the temperature plummeted, the air growing heavy with a palpable sense of dread. Then he heard it, a faint moan echoing through the empty corridors, a sound filled with anguish and despair. His heart pounded in his chest as he followed the sound, his camera clutched tightly in his hand. The old radio sat on the nightstand, its wooden casing scratched and worn, its dial glowing faintly in the darkness. It was a relic of a bygone era, a time when families gathered around the warm glow of vacuum tubes, their imaginations ignited by the voices that crackled through the speakers. But this night, the radio was tuned to a frequency that was not listed on the dial, a frequency that whispered of secrets and shadows. The static crackled. Then a voice, thin and reedy, broke through the white noise. It spoke of things unseen, of entities that lurked just beyond our perception, of a darkness that threatened to consume the world. The voice was urgent, desperate, pleading for someone, anyone, to listen. The words tumbled out in a torrent of fear and madness, painting a picture of a world on the brink of collapse, a world where the veil between realities had thinned, allowing things of nightmare to bleed through. The listener, a young man named Daniel, sat transfixed, his mind reeling from the chilling broadcast. He'd always been fascinated by the paranormal, drawn to the mysteries that lay beyond the realm of the known. But this was different. This felt real, raw, a terrifying glimpse into a hidden world that sent shivers down his spine. The voice on the radio continued, its intensity growing, its message becoming more fragmented, more incoherent. Then, in a final burst of static, the broadcast ended, leaving Daniel alone in the silence, haunted by the chilling words that echoed in the darkness. These stories, these chilling glimpses into the darkness that surrounds us, are just a taste of the mysteries that remain unsolved, the secrets that whisper in the shadows. The world is a strange and wondrous place, filled with wonders and terrors that we may never fully comprehend. But perhaps that's what makes it so captivating, so endlessly fascinating. Sleep tight, and remember, some stories are too real to be ignored. They linger in the back of our minds, reminding us that the line between the known and the unknown is thin, fragile, and easily breached. Subscribe to our channel Ghostly Legends,